So, the whole idea about secrets, I think, it is very important how people feel about technology and whether it's a good or bad thing. If you think about stealth aircraft, that was a genuine secret for about 15 to 17 years. Mm-hmm. The military had it, people didn't know about it, and then suddenly they did. They didn't know how it worked and they couldn't reproduce it, but they knew that it existed. It makes one feel very insecure and kind of paranoid if you think we're 15 to 17 years behind in general. That, you know, the military in all, you know, developed countries has things we don't know about, and the bad people in the world also have things we don't know about, and it makes, you know, technology something very malignant if indeed we're that far behind. So I think secrets become crucial. Most people today don't think we're that far behind. They don't think that we are, you know, a whole generation behind in terms of what we know and what, you know, the military has and that sort of thing.
I mean, the way I would push you back on that a little bit is to say that at some level that's always been true. That there have always been secrets that the majority of people do not know, and there are things that we will never know. And some of that is about politics and you know, reasons of state and all that kind of thing. Some of it is about copyright and that kind of thing. And the question is, well, a question is, do we need to know everything? I mean, that knowing things that we can do nothing about make our life less good, perhaps, than ignorance of them. So I don't know. I mean, I would say, you know, when I look at, if you look at the people living in the 16th century, the majority of them knew nothing about anything. I mean, they had never seen a ruler. They had no idea how taxes were collected, or, you know, anything really. And so their knowledge of the world was a very particular piece of that world. And yet they lived and died in a very whole, complete, rich, full life. And I mean, I don't know quite what I want to say about the modern world, where we hunger to know everything, and yet we don't know it well enough to do anything about it. You know, it's a very tricky
Well,
thing.
it has to do with privacy also. You can imagine that a time will come where there'll be nanobots we can't see that can be in the air, that can visualize everything. There will be these little tiny cameras that nobody knows are there. And in other ways, everything we do will be surveilled and witnessed. And so, in a sense, you're quite right. I mean, we don't need, and most of our lives are so incredibly boring that nobody else needs to know about them, right? I mean, it's not that we have the right to privacy, it's that it's so mundane what we're doing at the moment that why should there be a video, a picture? It's just not warranted.
At least that's what we all hope, right? You know, I was going to go in a different direction there, that sociologists of knowledge have spent an amount of time talking about something that's called black boxing, where we only know what goes into a process and what comes out of it. Right. And it's mysterious to us what's in the middle of that. And sometimes that is knowable, and sometimes it's just not knowable. And it can be philosophically concerning for especially scientists who cannot keep track of every step of what they're doing, and so leads to a suspicion about whether we can trust the final outcome. I mean, that's the other side of saying, well, maybe we just don't want to know things that we have no control over. The problem is, how can we know that we don't have control over them if we don't know what they are? An example of this in history of science, which I've always thought was very instructive, is the experimental physicists just before the Second World War, who were starting to develop a way to look at atomic tracks of how did subatomic particles, how did they actually move, and how did they interact. And the way they did this was by exposing Kodak plates in a kind of Millikan oil drop apparatus. But the problem was that Kodak would not tell them the chemistry behind the plates, so they had no way of being able to judge what was happening on the film. And they actually used women who mostly this was again in England, were mostly immigrants from Germany, to painstakingly put together the hundreds and hundreds of photographs that would actually tell you how this was happening. And the scientists didn't really know what they were doing. And as it turned out, those women had particular skills that could not be replicated by the scientists. And the way they found this out is that many of them were put into concentration camps when the Second World War started, because they were German and Eastern European. And these scientists would have to bicycle out to these concentration camps to get help from these women, because they had no idea how to do this. And it meant that the experimental physicists were very unsure about what they were seeing. And they were being told by the theoretical physicists that they were second-class citizens anyway, that they weren't thinking the big ideas, they were just doing silly experiments, and what would that mean? And so it really did, the whole thing meant that they were very uncertain of how the atom worked for a very long time. And one can argue that it was really the theoretical physicists that took the lead in what would become the Manhattan Project, because the experimental physicists were kind of off to one side. So, there's an example where there's just too many things that people are going to have to know.
Are there other questions? Earl, you must have something here.
Well, that's a very interesting talk, Lesley. I guess what I'm most interested in is how medicine became as grand as it is now.
Sorry, say that again.
How medicine became, so overwhelmingly important, and how that related to what happened in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance. Is there a transitional phase there that you see, or?
I was moving out, and then I realized that probably the light is right here, so I'll stay here. I think that it would be wrong to see medicine as the most important subject in this early modern period. I think if you look, partly because the academic side of this was useless, frankly. That is that university-trained physicians, as far as I can tell, nothing they did was helpful in any way. So that when you look at medicine in this early period, the people who actually could cure things were these wise women in the communities, because they actually manipulated the body, and that they actually did this by trial and error, that it had been very instrumental. Whereas those who got a Bachelor of Medicine degree, they knew how to cast horoscopes, they knew how to examine urine, but they never touched a body. And part of the reason they never touched the body is because there was a different guild for that, the barber surgeons. And the barber surgeons were really barbers who had saws and so could amputate and that sort of thing. And this actually is a huge problem in Europe well into the 19th century, because the physicians couldn't do anything about drugs, and it was actually the pharmacists who could do something with drugs. Gradually, the physicians also learned drugs so that they could give drugs, and then that's what they did, because they couldn't touch the body. They couldn't examine bodies, so you just get patients to tell you what was happening. So people didn't have much faith that a doctor was really going to help them all that much. And in fact, people became their own physician in many ways, that there were lots of books once printing started that allowed you to learn how to cure. There were sort of recipe books that told you how to cure yourself. And I would actually say that doctors only start to achieve a measure of status as successful technologies come in. So an example of this is midwifery. That until starting in the 16th century and really into the 17th century, we have the introduction of forceps. And before that, the way that you'd have a baby, I mean, if you could, and if it didn't come unexpectedly, is you as the pregnant woman you would have a lying-in period of about a month where you kind of got ready for everything. You would bring the local midwife, who was just a older woman who probably had children of her own and had done this a lot. She came and helped and was with you and then helped with the delivery. There would be a number of women from the neighborhood around who would help. Men would be excluded from all of this. And eventually the women would have I've forgotten the name of it, that you'd be churched, where you'd go back to church and be sanctified so that you could join in with the spiritual community once you'd have the baby. Many women died in childbirth. Many babies died, but it was a very social and hopeful kind of thing that happened. And then a family of a man developed forceps and kept it as a sort of copyrighted a trade secret, and gradually licensed this out to other male midwives, as they were called. Now the problem with forceps is that they were only used on dead fetuses, because they were just to get the fetus out, and it usually didn't come in one piece. And they are quite awful instruments. But for women who were going to die with a dead fetus inside them, this was huge. And gradually people started to feel that a male midwife with that kind of technology was worth having. And you see that again in the 19th century with the development of some drugs. And really so the drugs that actually could make a difference, I think, raised the status of doctors. There's more to say about that, but that's sort of where we are. And of course, hospitals don't become a safe place for rich people until the end of the 20th century. It's okay. Stupid questions are good too.
Questions?
There are parts of the world that don't have access to modern medicine, that still,
Sure.
I guess in a sense, are living in the dark ages. So this is going to be a two-part question, I think, but what does it take to bring modern medicine to those places where mysticism is often the most common form of medicine?
And that's a very difficult question. Let me start by pushing back a little bit, by saying I wouldn't want to say that places that have no access to modern medicine are in the dark ages. They again live in a full, complete spiritual and physical world that they understand. And what we would criticize with that is, first of all, the science that we believe is behind modern medicine is just not present there. But second of all, people die. And that's a pretty objective measure that their medicine is not working as well as our medicine. And so I'll admit to you that I find this a complicated question too, because I think that we don't want to just be Eurocentric. We don't want to say our medicine is the best, and we want to come in and just take over. But we also, if we're honest with ourselves, believe that people living is better than people dying, and that we sometimes have, through Western medicine, the possibility of doing that. And yet, we lose things in that modern medicine, right? We lose some of the spiritual journey, we lose some of the community, we lose some of people's sense of their bodies, which sometimes can help them to heal as well. So I'm in favor of something syncretic. I mean, I think that when we look at some of the things that have happened with AIDS in Africa, the places where there's been successful change has been where people came in and worked with the healers in the region to think about how you could put that together in some way. And yet it is very tricky, right? I mean, it's like There's a lot of discussion now about Chinese traditional medicine and how we can make that syncretic with Western medicine. And I bet that there are people in the room, and I would probably be one of them, that would be a little skeptical about that. And yet, what I'm trying to say is that we can't just assume that the medicine that we know that has grown up in this very particular way is the only thing there is. I mean, when I look at the mental health pandemic that is in the Western world, I think maybe we're not doing it all right.
So just to follow up then, on the flip side, we have modern medicine now, which a lot of people in the modern world are pushing back against and going to more traditional medicine or herbal remedies. So, how to turn this into a question? Maybe the question there is, should we fear that, or should we really, scrutinize it in a scientific way and try and accept that there are other ways of treating disease?
I mean, again, you've hit on a very difficult area. Because I too have a kind of knee-jerk reaction of, singing to water is not actually going to make you well. So, let's be clear, some of this is just quackery. And there's been quackery all through history, right? And so maybe that's part of the way you start, is that there really are things that no one really believes except for a few kind of zealots. And so I think we ignore it at our peril, because I think that we do have to talk about, really what's the science behind this. But then there's a range of things that are much less clear than that. And I think that modern medical practitioners would be foolish to just dismiss them. I mean, I think that it would be a good idea to do some clinical studies to actually examine how some of these things work and whether they do. But it may also be, the body and health is a very complicated thing, and it's not, as philosophers and scholars have been saying for 1,000 years, it's not just the blood and guts, right? I mean, that we could put it together in all sorts of ways, but there is the lived experience of those bodies, and there are people get well or don't get well for reasons that seem to have nothing to do with medicine. And so I think that we have to find a way that we put that into medicine as well. And part of that's just paying attention. Good.
If you don't mind.
Oh, he has another one. Oh. Okay, you can wait a minute.
Go ahead.
Oh, he says go ahead.
This one's pretty far out there, because we were talking about magic and about witchcraft and about really kind of the pursuit of knowledge in that vein. And in modern times, a lot of the discoveries that we take for granted, like the structure of the benzene ring or the structure of DNA, came from what many people consider mystical experiences, so dreaming or using LSD or amphetamines.
At least so the story goes, but yes.
Yeah, so the story goes, but in a lot of individual cases, whether you believe in that or not, but are we missing out as scientists by excising the mystical and the religious experiences that many people had?
I mean, probably yes. I mean, I certainly think there's actually been a lot of talk now recently about how inspiration works for scientists and doctors, what is the path of discovery, right? That discovery is not just hard work and sort of putting one stone on top of another. There are those aha moments. There are those moments of intuition, and so that's a kind of low level of that perhaps. But I do think that we need to see that as part of what guides us. And again, when I think of physicians and doctors in general, that because the body is complicated because people are complicated. You're often using your intuition about listening to the whole person and figuring out, well, I think this is going in this direction. My cousin is an OB-GYN, and she says, I listen to things and I think, well, I could go through my medical text and say, okay, it could be this, could be this, could be this, could be this, but it's likely this. And so I have to judge on the basis of knowing that person and knowing where she lives and what her circumstances are. So I think that definitely goes into it. I'm not, taking LSD and stuff, I'm not quite so sure about, although I recommend, you may or may not know Erica Dick, who used to teach here. She's written a great book on the beginning of LSD treatment for psychiatric illnesses that started in Saskatchewan in the 50s, which is a must read, I tell you. It's where the term psychedelic came from, so there you go.
Yeah, I think some of your comments earlier about what people's beliefs are and how that all comes together. I guess in the modern world and what our beliefs and what our core values are. We talked, somebody mentioned earlier about people that are in the dark ages. What's to say that whatever connects them to what their beliefs are and what, if they're living their lives properly, doesn't necessarily have to be the same of what everybody else's is.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely. I mean, I believe that we are in the midst of an existential crisis because of our lack of connection in the Western world. And I am not convinced, I say this is not my area of research, it's just my belief as a human being, but I do not believe that all the social media in the world makes up for that. And so we've lost something. And we need to recognize that, we may look at other cultures either historically or geographically or whatever and think, oh, that seems ridiculous. But we don't have all the answers. And I really do think that social connection, that spiritual connection, and I don't say that as saying we should all become a particular religion or anything like that, but we forget that at our peril, I guess is what I would say.
Well, I think your point is very valid in the sense of when you look at community and how all the pieces come together, where, an individual can make a big difference on all themselves, but when you put a bunch of people together, that, like you say, the aha moments that come through, where when you put 4 people together, you never know what's going to come out of it when people start sharing ideas and sharing some of that energy moving together that as individuals could never get there. And I think that's the part that I think may be missing. And when you talk about medicine today, getting back to the original discussion, the focus on medicine is more on sickness and what to do to get back to health. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about placebos and all that kind of stuff, and some things that people go through that have those aha moments and their lives change dramatically from a health perspective and focus on what's important. It's almost to look maybe the reverse of it is the focus should maybe be people that are very healthy and low stress and in that type of environment. What makes the difference for that, in the sense that when I look at the chaos of the world today with heart disease and all that stuff, that the focus of all of our research is on people that are sick and how to get them well. Maybe it should be more proactive in the sense of what is it that the people that are healthy, what are they doing right that the majority isn't doing? Has there been studies like that on, we don't seem to see a lot of that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I was struck, I guess it was in this morning's paper, there was the article about the reduction in the number of bypass operations and the reduction of cardiac illness in Edmonton just in the last decade. And it seems to me pretty clear that it correlates very well to the smoking bans that have made it more and more difficult for people to smoke. And so there's an instance where behavior turns out to be way more important than any Lipitor or any drugs we can imagine. And I know that people know that, and that's you hear that all the time. And But I also think that we're a society that believes that medicine should cure us, and you know, I can have all my social constructivism and all that kind of stuff, and I go to the doctor and I want to know what's wrong and I want to know how to fix it right away. So it's not like medicine is making this up either. It's what when I think back to this early modern period, people put up with a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain. People would have been in chronic pain all the time. And we just, you know, we get a cold and, you know, we're like, oh, call my mom. We don't believe we should ever be in pain. And so I think that's, at one level, that's fabulous that we have a society in which that could even be possible. But it does mean that we want particular instrumentality from medicine.
Out of time.
Amazing.
So thank you very, very much. This has been a really excellent session.
Thank you. Thank you very much.